The morning sun had just climbed over the ridge when Grandpa Hank noticed something strange hanging from his front gate, a bright white envelope sealed with an embossed gold logo. He squinted through the glare, wiped his hands on his faded jeans, and pulled it off the latch. The letters Maple Ridge Estates HOA gleamed across the top. He hadn't heard that name before, but the tone of the letter made his stomach tighten. Inside was a notice, formal, cold, and full of legal words that didn't make much sense at first glance. The gist was simple enough. The new Homeowners Association claimed that Hank's ranch now fell within their expanded jurisdiction, and that he owed a staggering $250,000 in backdated community fees and infrastructure contributions. It also warned that failure to pay within 60 days could result in lien enforcement and possible forfeiture of property rights. Hank chuckled under his breath, thinking it had to be a joke. He'd owned that ranch for over 50 years. His father had owned it before him. The land stretched past the old cottonwoods, down to the creek that split the valley. It had always been free land outside any town limits or development zone. There wasn't a single HOA sign for miles, only dirt roads and pasture. That evening, as he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, Hank reread the letter. The language was bold, threatening even. He imagined some slick office worker typing it up, expecting an old man to panic. His granddaughter, Emma, stopped by after work, and when she saw the letter, her eyes went wide. "Grandpa, this looks serious. Maybe you should call someone," she said. Hank smiled faintly, that glint of mischief shining through his wrinkles. "Darlin', I've seen droughts, taxes, and rustlers. Ain't no paperwork gonna scare me." Still, he folded the notice neatly and slid it into the pocket of his flannel shirt. He didn't know who these Maple Ridge folks were, but they had picked the wrong man to intimidate. The next morning, he started his old Chevy pickup, the engine coughing to life. He tossed the letter onto the dashboard and turned toward town. If the HOA wanted to talk about his land, they'd have to do it face to face, with the man who knew every inch of it better than anyone alive. The drive into town was slow and steady, the old Chevy rattling along the gravel road as dust rose in the rearview mirror. Grandpa Hank hadn't been to Maple Ridge in years, not since the developers turned the old wheat fields into rows of manicured lawns and cookie-cutter homes. Where cattle once grazed, there were now driveways lined with shiny SUVs and flower beds trimmed to perfection. It looked tidy, sterile, and lifeless. Hank parked near a sleek glass building that stood out like a sore thumb against the country backdrop. A polished sign read, "Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association Headquarters." Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and new carpet. Behind a marble counter sat a young woman with perfect hair and a plastic smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. Hank held up the envelope. "Yeah. I got this letter saying I owe you folks $250,000. Thought I'd come clear that up." The receptionist blinked, unsure whether to laugh or call security. "You'll need to speak to Mr. Denton, our HOA president," she said finally. A few minutes later, the double doors swung open and in walked Charles Denton, a tall man in a designer suit with a grin too wide to be friendly. "Mr. Hank Lawson," he said, shaking Hank's rough hand with a look of practiced sympathy. "I was hoping you'd come by. You see, your ranch is technically within Maple Ridge's new boundary lines. We've upgraded roads, irrigation, and utilities around your property. Naturally, everyone benefits, so everyone pays." Hank studied the man, silent for a long moment. "That land's been in my family since before this town had a stoplight," he said finally. "Ain't no one ever told me I was part of some fancy association." Charles's smile tightened. "Boundaries change, Mr. Lawson. If you refuse to cooperate, our board will have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Hank's weathered face didn't flinch. He stood up slowly, tucking his hat under his arm. "Well, Mr. Denton, I reckon we'll see about that." Without another word, he walked out of the building, his boots echoing on the tile floor. Charles watched him leave, smirking slightly, sure the old man would give up. But Hank wasn't heading home to surrender. He was heading home to get proof. When Hank got back to the ranch, the sun was dipping low over the horizon, painting the hills in streaks of gold and rust. He went straight to the old storage room beside the barn, a place that smelled of cedar, dust, and memory. He pulled the chain light, revealing shelves cluttered with tools, photo albums, and stacks of yellowing papers. In the far corner sat a weathered metal safe, the kind built to last generations. Hank knelt down, spun the combination with a steady hand, and pulled it open with a creak. Inside were the treasures of a lifetime: his father's watch, his mother's Bible, and a thick folder marked property deeds. He carried the folder to the kitchen table and began to sort through the pages. There it was, the original deed from 1946, signed and notarized, describing the exact boundaries of the ranch. The wording was clear: outside incorporated limits of the county. No mention of Maple Ridge. No overlap. No ambiguity. His father had even drawn a map by hand, its faded ink showing the old oak tree, the well, and the southern fence line that marked the edge of their land. Hank poured himself a cup of black coffee and kept reading. The more he looked, the more obvious it became: the HOA had no legal right to his property. But he wanted more than proof, he wanted answers. So the next morning, he drove to see his old friend, Tom Carter, who had once worked for the county land office. Tom's hair was grayer now, but his mind was still sharp as a tack. After an hour of scanning files on the county computer, Tom frowned. "Hank, you're not gonna like this," he said. "Maple Ridge's boundary maps were altered last year, digitally amended to include your ranch and 3 others. But the official county approval is missing. Someone pushed these changes through without the legal paperwork." Hank leaned back in his chair, the truth settling in like a storm cloud. "You're telling me that Snake, Denton, tried to steal my land on paper?" Tom nodded. "Looks that way." Hank's jaw tightened, but his eyes were calm. "Then it's time we showed the whole town what kind of game he's playing at." He tucked the deeds under his arm, tipped his hat, and left the office, his next stop, the town hall meeting. The town hall was packed that evening, the buzz of chatter filling the air as residents from Maple Ridge and the surrounding county squeezed into the old community center. Word had spread fast, something about the HOA and a rancher being at odds. The board sat at the front table under a banner that read Maple Ridge Community Progress Meeting. At the center, Charles Denton adjusted his tie, confident as ever. He didn't expect Hank Lawson to show up with anything more than bluster. But when the doors creaked open, the room quieted. Hank stepped in, wearing his best denim jacket, hat in hand, and a folder tucked under his arm. He moved with the steady confidence of a man who'd seen too many storms to fear another. Behind him followed Tom Carter, carrying a stack of county records. They walked straight to the front. "Mr. Lawson," Charles said, his voice tight but polite, "this is a private board meeting." Hank smiled. "Looks mighty public to me." He turned to face the crowd. "I reckon y'all should hear this, since it's your land they're messin' with too." He set the folder on the table, pulling out the old deeds, one by one. "This here," he said, tapping the yellowed paper, "is my family's land deed from 1946. Signed, sealed, and recorded before any of these fancy subdivisions existed. My ranch ain't part of Maple Ridge, never was, never will be." Charles chuckled nervously. "That's an outdated document, Mr. Lawson. Our updated maps." "That's where you're wrong," Tom interrupted, holding up the county report. "Those updated maps were forged. No county seal, no approval, no authorization. The man who altered them? Charles Denton." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed as a few locals started recording. Charles's confident smile vanished. "This is absurd," he shouted, but Hank wasn't done. He pulled out one last paper, a letter from the county clerk, confirming the fraud and naming the HOA president under investigation. By the time